Today we're going to be doing another dive, and this time it's Chapter 9 of Artificial Empathy.
Oh, excellent.
This chapter, it's fascinating because it really gets into how AI, even with all its advances, it still struggles with something that's so core to being human. Understanding why things happen. It's like AI can win at Jeopardy, but it can't explain the logic behind the answers.
It's a real paradox, and the book uses this brilliant comparison: human brains and chimp brains.
Yeah.
Structurally, so similar, but the outcomes are just vastly different.
It's like having the same ingredients, right? Like you and I both have the same ingredients, but you make this amazing 5-star meal, and all I can manage is like burnt toast.
Yeah.
And so AI can mimic skills, can even be better than us at certain tasks, but it often lacks that deeper understanding of cause and effect. It's got the what, but not the why.
And that missing why is really the crux of it, right?
Yeah.
Because it makes you question whether we can truly teach machines to think like us, to have those aha moments of genuine learning instead of just data regurgitation.
Yeah. And the book uses this phrase, narrowly smarter, broadly dumber, to describe how humans have evolved.
Oh, interesting.
Where we specialize, we become experts in certain things, but maybe we lose some of that broader cognitive flexibility.
Well, and think about it in your own life, right? Like, how many of us would try to navigate a new city without GPS now, or memorize a grocery list when we can just look at our phones? We've sort of offloaded some of that general intelligence onto tools and technology.
Oh, absolutely. I'm right there with you. I can barely remember my own phone number these days. But here's where it gets really interesting. The book connects this to the whole zombie thing we see in pop culture.
Oh, wow.
And not that we're facing an actual zombie apocalypse, but thematically, it's kind of a brilliant parallel. Zombies represent this loss of empathy, this disconnect from the world. And the book argues that over-reliance on tech could lead to a similar narrowing of understanding, potentially even empathy.
That's a little creepy, but it's super thought-provoking.
It is. It really is.
Mhm.
So how does this all tie back to AI and its struggle with this why?
Well, the book goes on to explain how, for all its power, standard deep learning is still kind of stuck at a basic level of cognition, like memorizing flashcards. You know the facts, but not necessarily the connections between them.
Yeah.
And that's where the book brings in this idea from Judea Pearl, who talks about this hierarchy of causal reasoning with 3 levels. First is observation, just seeing what happens. Second is intervention, actively doing something to see what changes. And third, the most complex, are counterfactuals, like imagining what-if scenarios. And that third level, that ability to imagine, to reason about alternative possibilities, that's where AI really stumbles. We humans are constantly running these mental simulations, playing out different scenarios, and that's crucial for deep understanding.
Yeah, I'm thinking of it like learning to cook. You can read all the recipes you want,
Yeah.
but until you actually try making something, mess up, adjust your technique, that's where the real learning happens.
Absolutely. And the book is arguing that AI needs that same kind of hands-on interactive learning experience to move just superficial knowledge. And this is where embodied learning comes in.
Okay, embodied learning. I like the sound of that. Tell me more.
So Jeff Hawkins, who's done some amazing work in neuroscience, he's a big advocate for this idea. He says the brain learns by moving, by sensing, building a 3D model of the world in its mind, almost like a mental CAD program.
Wow.
But how we train AI now is way more passive. We feed it tons of data without really letting it explore and experiment on its own.
So it's like expecting someone to become a master architect just by looking at blueprints, without ever actually building something, seeing how it works in the real world.
Exactly. And even DeepMind, the company behind AlphaGo and all that, they seem to be coming around to this idea as well. They're saying future AI needs to be more autonomous, able to learn through its own actions and experiences in the world, not just data absorption.
So it's a huge shift in thinking. Like we're going from seeing AI as this student passively taking in information to more like an explorer, actively shaping its understanding.
It is a pretty big shift, and it brings up all these fascinating questions about how we design AI that can learn more like we do, through interaction and exploration.
And speaking of challenging assumptions, the book also tackles this idea that human perception is like a camera, just passively recording images.
Ah, yes, that classic analogy. But the book argues it's really misleading, and it uses these cool optical illusions to demonstrate how our brains are actively constructing our perception of the world, rather than just passively recording it.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. I love a good optical illusion. What kind of illusions are we talking about?
Well, one example they use is that checkerboard shadow illusion. Have you seen that one? Where two squares labeled A and B, they look like different shades of gray, but they're actually the same color.
Wait, really? Oh, I have seen that one.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely convinced they were different shades.
It tricks our brains because of how we interpret shadows and depth, even in a flat image.
Wow.
And there are tons of these illusions, tilted lines that seem to converge, faces that warp in your peripheral vision. It all points to this idea that our brains aren't just taking in data, they're actively making sense of it, interpreting it, filling in the gaps.
So if our brains are constantly interpreting and constructing our reality, what does that mean for AI? How do we even begin to replicate that?
The book argues that one of the reasons humans learn so efficiently is because we exploit these prior assumptions about the world based on our evolution and experience. These priors help us make sense of new information and learn from it quickly. And AI, for the most part, lacks this crucial ability.
So it's like saying AI needs some built-in gut feelings about how the world works to really understand it. But how do we even begin to give a machine that kind of intuition?
That's a great question, and the book goes on to explore some really fascinating ideas about how we might be able to do that, and one of the most surprising ones involves our sense of touch.
Touch. Really? I always thought vision was the most important sense when it comes to intelligence.
Vision has definitely gotten most attention, but the book makes a pretty bold claim. Touch might be the missing link to general AI.
Okay, you've got my attention. Tell me more about why touch is so important.
Well, think about it. Touch is how we first experience the world as infants. Long before our vision is fully developed, we're learning about objects, space, interaction, all through touch. It's fundamental to how we build an understanding of our surroundings.
That makes sense. It's not just that we see the world, we feel it. And that feeling gives us this different, more grounded understanding.
Exactly. And the book highlights some really interesting research from groups like Numenta and Vicarious, both working on AGI, showing that AI agents learning through touch can actually develop some pretty unique, more robust understandings compared to those learning through passive vision.
It's like we've been trying to teach AI to understand the world by showing it pictures, when what it really needs is to reach out and touch it.
It is a pretty radical idea, and it leads to some really fascinating questions about how we incorporate this sense of touch, this physical interaction with the world, into AI research moving forward.
I mean, this is all incredible, but where do we go from here? How do we even begin to integrate touch into AI research? What are the next steps?
Those are great questions, and the book explores some really groundbreaking research happening right now on that front. But it also highlights another crucial element in human intelligence that we haven't touched on yet, and that's the interplay between dexterity and language.
Okay, I can see the connection between dexterity and touch, but how does language fit into all of this?
Well, the book makes this fascinating argument that our hands, those incredibly dexterous tools, may have actually played a pivotal role in the evolution of language, and by extension, human intelligence as a whole.
Wow, I never thought about language being connected to our hands. But it makes sense when you think about how much we still use our hands to communicate, even today, all the gesturing and so on.
It's much more than just gesturing. The book brings up this concept of Umwelt, which basically means an organism's unique way of experiencing the world based on its body and senses. And the argument is that our dexterous hands led to tool making, which then required us to teach those skills to others.
And to teach complex skills, you need complex language.
Right.
It's like that saying, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. To be a teacher, you have to have a deep understanding.
Exactly. And what's even wilder is the book suggests that even the evolution of our vocal cords, our ability to speak with such nuance and complexity, might be tied to the need to free up our hands while we were making and explaining these complex tools.
That is a mind-blowing connection.
Mhm.
So our ability to speak could be a direct result of our ancestors needing to talk with their hands full.
It's a really compelling theory, and it just underscores how deeply intertwined our physical abilities and our cognitive development are. But the book doesn't stop there. It goes on to explore what it calls a potential paradigm shift in AI research, the move towards self-supervised learning.
Okay, a paradigm shift. Now you've really got my attention. Tell me more.
So you remember earlier we were talking about unsupervised learning?
Yeah.
Well, the book and a lot of leading AI researchers are moving away from that term and embracing this new one, self-supervised learning.
Self-supervised learning. So what's the difference?
It's a subtle but important distinction. In self-supervised learning, the AI learns from the structure of the data itself, without needing those explicit labels or instructions from humans.
So it's more like figuring things out by observing patterns, making connections on its own, kind of like how a baby learns about its surroundings.
Exactly. And some of the biggest names in AI, folks like LeCun, Hinton, the team at DeepMind, they all see this as a major path forward. They believe it could lead to AI that learns more efficiently, develops a deeper understanding of the world.
It's starting to sound more and more like how humans actually learn. We're not just passively absorbing information, we're actively seeking out patterns, making connections, testing our hypotheses about the world.
Exactly. And that leads to what the book calls a surge in something called artificial fluency, which is a really fascinating concept.
Okay, artificial fluency. Does that mean AI that can speak multiple languages or something?
It's even cooler than that. Artificial fluency refers to AI that can actually generate media text, images, even music so well that it's hard to distinguish from human-made content. Think GPT-3, DLE-2, those kinds of systems.
Wow, those are some heavy hitters in the AI world.
Yeah.
But if AI can generate content that's indistinguishable from human-made, does that mean it's achieved human-level intelligence?
Well, that's where things get really tricky. The book argues that these systems, while incredibly fluent, are still missing a crucial element: human judgment and empathy.
So they might be able to write beautiful poetry or paint stunning pictures, but they don't necessarily understand the meaning behind their creations or the impact they might have on others.
Exactly. The book describes them as operating in this dreamlike state. They can create and generate, but they don't fully grasp the consequences of their actions or the ethical implications of what they're creating.
That's both amazing and kind of unsettling at the same time. Like, we've unlocked this powerful new form of magic, but we haven't quite figured out how to wield it responsibly.
That's a great way to put it. And that's actually where the book takes us next, into this idea of meta levels of fluency, a framework for understanding these different levels of knowing, from basic interaction all the way to abstract reasoning and moral development. But I think we've covered a lot of ground already. Maybe we should take a break here and come back fresh to dive into those meta levels.
Yeah, my brain is definitely full. We've gone from zombies and optical illusions to touchy-feely robots and AI poets. I need a minute to process all of this before we go any further.
Sounds like a plan. We've laid a really good foundation, and when we come back, we'll climb those meta levels of fluency and delve even deeper into this fascinating world of artificial empathy.
Okay, so back to those meta levels of fluency. I'm ready to climb that ladder of understanding.
Well, hold on tight because it's a pretty fascinating climb. The book outlines these 4 distinct levels, and each one builds on the one before it.
All right, so each run on the ladder represents a deeper level of knowing.
You got it. And that first rung, it's called participatory knowing. Think of it like learning through direct experience, interacting with the world through your senses.
So it's that hands-on learning we were talking about earlier, right? Like, you can't just read about something, you have to actually do it to understand.
Exactly. It's like a baby exploring its surroundings, or you trying out a new recipe for the first time. You're getting your hands dirty, literally and figuratively. And that brings us to the second rung. Perspectival knowing.
Perspectival knowing.
This is where language comes in. Once we've had those hands-on experiences, we start to put them into words, give them shape and meaning. We share our perspectives with others, and that helps us build on our understanding.
So it's not just about doing, it's about reflecting on what you've done and communicating those experiences. Like, it's the difference between just baking a cake and writing down the recipe, sharing it with your friends.
That's a great analogy. And that act of communication, putting our experiences into words, it actually deepens our understanding even more. You know how sometimes when you're trying to explain something to someone else, it suddenly becomes so much clearer in your own mind?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. It's
Yeah.
like teaching is the best way to learn, right?
Right. Okay. So are you ready for level 3?
Hit me with it.
All right, level 3 is where things get really interesting. It's called procedural knowing, and it's this realization that we can actually change how we do things. We can improve our processes, refine our techniques, find more effective ways to learn and interact with the world.
So it's not just knowing what to do, it's knowing how to do it better. Like becoming your own coach, always striving to level up your skills.
Precisely. And this level requires a certain amount of self-awareness, right? It's that ability to step back, analyze our own actions, identify areas for improvement, and then make those adjustments.
That's a pretty powerful skill. And I can see how it would be crucial for any kind of advanced intelligence, whether it's human or artificial. Okay, bring on the final run, the top of this ladder of knowing. What's up there?
At the top, we have propositional knowing. This is where we start to connect those dots, see those bigger pictures. We discover general principles that apply across different areas of knowledge. We develop abstract ideas, values, morals, the very foundations of how we view the world.
Wow, so it's like graduating from specific experiences to universal truths. It's the difference between knowing how to ride a bike and understanding the laws of physics.
Exactly. And the point the book makes is that right now, most AI is really stuck down there at that first level, that participatory knowing. It can learn to do tasks, but it doesn't really have that capacity to reflect on those experiences, communicate them in a meaningful way, or develop that deeper understanding of the principles behind what it's doing.
So it's like we've built these amazing machines that can do incredible things, but they don't really get why they're doing them or what the larger implications might be. They're missing that big picture perspective.
Exactly. And that's the challenge, right? If we want to create AI that's not just intelligent, but wise, compassionate, ethical, we need to help it develop those higher levels of knowing. It's not just about building smarter machines, it's about cultivating a deeper understanding of the world and our place in it.
It's a really profound thought. It's like we're not just building machines, we're shaping the future of intelligence itself.
And that brings us back to that core question. Can AI truly achieve human-level intelligence? With all its complexities, with all its nuances, can it learn to understand not just what is happening, but why? Can it develop empathy, judgment, a sense of responsibility for its actions?
These are big questions. I don't know if we have the answers yet, but it's a journey worth taking. Just exploring those possibilities is fascinating.
I agree. And the book ends this chapter with a really powerful call to action. It's challenging all of us to think about how we can embrace the challenge of building AI that's not just smart, but also good.
Good AI. That's such a powerful concept. It suggests that intelligence isn't just about processing power or problem-solving skills. It's about values. It's about ethics. It's about a deep understanding of what it means to be human.
And that actually leads us to where the book goes next, diving even deeper into this concept of artificial fluency. Remember how we talked about those AI systems like GPT-3 and DALL-E 2 that can generate this incredibly realistic content?
Yeah, the ones that could write poetry and make art that was almost indistinguishable from human creations. It was mind-blowing and honestly, a little creepy at the same time.
It's definitely a double-edged sword. On one hand, you have these amazing tools that can amplify human creativity and expression, but on the other hand, we need to think really carefully about the potential for misuse, for deception, for AI being used to manipulate and control.
It's like we've stumbled upon this powerful new form of magic, but we haven't figured out the rules of the game yet. And figuring out those rules, it goes beyond just the technical stuff. It touches on some really fundamental questions about ethics, about philosophy, even about what it means to be human in the first place.
You've hit the nail on the head. And that's why the book takes us even deeper, exploring this concept of artificial empathy and challenging us to think about whether AI can go beyond mimicking human abilities to actually understanding and even sharing our values, our vulnerabilities, our hopes for the future.
You know, it seems like every time we think we've reached the limit of what AI can do, we discover this whole new layer of complexity that pushes us to rethink everything.
That's what makes this whole journey so captivating. We're not just learning about artificial intelligence, we're learning about ourselves, about the nature of intelligence itself, about the incredible possibilities and also the potential pitfalls that lie ahead as we keep pushing these boundaries.
So we've talked about artificial intelligence, we've climbed those meta levels of fluency, but now the big question, can AI truly be empathetic?
That's the heart of it, right? And the book makes this really interesting point. It says empathy, it's not just about recognizing emotions in others, it's about understanding the causes of those emotions, the why behind the feelings.
So it's like, it's one thing to see someone crying and think, oh, they're sad. But true empathy, it requires more. Like, why are they crying? What happened to make them feel this way? What led to this?
Exactly. And the book argues that this deeper level of understanding is tied to causal reasoning, something we've been talking about a lot already. Understanding that complex web of cause and effect that shapes how we think, how we feel, how we act.
So it's not enough for AI to just see patterns in data. It needs to understand how those patterns connect to real-world events, to the actual lived experiences of people. It needs to get the meaning, not just the data points.
You got it. And that kind of understanding, the book says, it can't come from just passively observing. It needs active engagement with the world, experimenting, intervening, testing things out, learning from the consequences.
It's like that embodied learning idea again, right? If AI is going to develop real empathy, it can't just sit on the sidelines. It needs to get in there and actually experience the world firsthand.
That's a great way to put it. And there's some really cool research happening around this. The book talks about these AI agents that are learning through physical interaction, through touch, instead of just passively taking in visual information.
So instead of showing AI a picture of someone crying, we need to give it experiences where it can understand those complex emotions, understand the situations that cause them, maybe even feel them in some way itself.
That's the idea. The book suggests that it's that deeper understanding of cause and effect, that sense of shared experience, which is crucial for developing real empathy.
But how do we even begin to teach a machine something like empathy? It seems so human, like so tied to our biology, our social interactions, all of that.
It's definitely a huge challenge. But the book does offer some possibilities. It talks about research into AI systems that are learning to model human behavior, predict our actions, even anticipate our emotional responses.
So it's like AI is learning to read our minds, trying to understand us from the inside out.
Well, maybe not mind reading exactly, but getting closer. And the book suggests that this ability to model human behavior, combined with a really sophisticated understanding of cause and effect, could be the key to unlocking artificial empathy.
Now I'm starting to see how all of this connects. We're not just talking about AI that can process information. We're talking about AI that understands the meaning of that information, the context, the impact it has on the world, on people.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting and maybe a little bit unsettling, too. Imagine AI that can not only create realistic art, write compelling stories, but also understand how those creations might affect people emotionally.
It's like AI is becoming this master storyteller, but not just any storyteller, one that understands the power of its words, of its creations, to move people, to inspire them, maybe even to manipulate them.
That's a really important point, and it brings up these huge ethical questions. If we're moving towards AI that can understand and maybe even manipulate human emotions, how do we make sure it uses that power responsibly? How do we instill in it compassion, ethical decision-making, a real understanding of consequences?
It's a lot to think about, and it's good that the book doesn't shy away from those questions
Yeah.
and really makes you consider both the amazing potential of artificial empathy and the potential risks, too.
For sure. And it reminds us that the future of AI, it's not set in stone. It's something we're actively creating through the choices we make, the research we focus on, the values we build into these systems.
That's a powerful message. It's not just about making machines smarter. It's about building a better future for everyone. One where AI and humans can work together, coexist in a way that benefits us all.